Hi, my name is Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. In this episode of the show, we're going to be discussing the next in the lineup of the AFI's Top 100 American Films, Taxi Driver, as well as the newest Paul Schrader film, First Reformed. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. Joining us for the first time is an actress from Chicago, Kat.
Hello.
How's it going?
It is fabulous. Glad to be here.
Sure. So, we kind of just took us a little bit of time to figure out what we were going to do, and then we realized that there was going to be a huge connection with having First Reformed with Taxi Driver, because First Reformed got nominated for Best Screenplay. I believe it lost, but it happens.
Did not Ethan Hawke also get a nod for Best Actor?
I think he got something.
He didn't get the Oscar, but I thought...
No, this is a big Oscar snub from this week. Or if not from...
Perhaps the nomination was the win. for a man of Schrader's caliber, just getting nominated is probably a pretty great thing.
I mean, he didn't get nominated for Hardcore. I mean, yeah, of all the other films in his filmography...
He's had a pretty great career. I don't think he's going to complain too much.
I guess we can go back to the old one. I don't know if Taxi Driver got... I think it got nominated, but...
These are all fact-checkable things. But...
Who does research?
Yes, but meanwhile, Taxi Driver was directed by Scorsese. It was one of his first, whereas Schrader wrote and directed First Reformed. So in that, they have some major differences, but the amount of similarities between these two films is astounding.
Yes, it's very... It's
Given
beautiful.
that they're 30 years apart.
Yeah.
Taxi Driver 1976, First Reformed. I guess technically they said 2017, but it's out now.
Yeah, I don't know why it's counted as 2017, but I know. But essentially, it was last year because that was when everyone saw it. So.
Right.
So yeah, do you want to just jump right into
Taxi Driver? Oh.
Yeah, well, we'll start with Taxi Driver.
Right.
But what immediately jumped out at you in comparison between the two?
Oh, in comparison, well, both of them feature stark loneliness of a male character. And I'd say Paul Schrader writes male loneliness incredibly well. He gives incredible opportunity for a male actor to do a deep dive into despair and loneliness and anger and bitterness. And the actors that are chosen, De Niro in Taxi Driver and Ethan Hawke in First Reformed, both are simply stellar. He also writes excellent character roles, although mostly just for the men. The ladies don't have a lot to say. They cast very well. All the ladies in all the films do very, very well. But I say Schrader writes for men, and he writes very, very well. The one-scene character roles in Taxi Driver, the gun dealer, the cuckold, the man who is sitting in the back, bringing him to the place where his wife is cheating on him, some of the most incredible acting. And that's all he does. He never comes back. It's fantastic work.
Sure. I mean, with Taxi Driver, there's a layer of some of that is obviously coming from Scorsese because he's clearly an amazing director and he can add a lot of nuance to the role and make violence more justified. You were talking a lot before we started about the justification of violence in Taxi Driver and how it earns the in a
violence. Storytelling arc sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, his violence earned in terms of its literal sense, maybe not. But yes.
This isn't like a Death Wish sense.
Right. But yes, in terms of the storytelling, Taxi Driver is incredibly slow, but for all the right reasons. There's a montage, a preparation montage, right, which has become a huge trope in films. They're like, I'm getting ready, no more bad food, I'm doing push-ups, I'm strapping on my weapons. And normally once you have your preparation montage, there's an immediate carnage sequence. Yeah. And in Taxi Driver, the prep sequence happens and there's another good 20 minutes, half an hour before he goes to do his mission, which is interesting. I find. And I wish that more movies would pay attention to why that is. That just because we're preparing for something, or what is prep other than a means to an end, the prep is in itself a journey. That makes it a much more interesting film to me. Now, First Reformed doesn't have a big prep sequence. By the time we get to the prep sequence, we're also in the action sequence to a certain extent.
Well, yeah, but I think First Reformed is also a very different setup and to pay off what that character's journey is.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's for one, there's a budget in Taxi Driver. I think First Reformed had to be written around the fact that there wasn't a budget. And there could have been like a big scene of cathartic violence at the end of First Reformed, but I don't think they could afford to blow up a New England church. So
right.
So I think they wrote it a little bit around those, but I think the way they did it is absolutely perfect because the ambiguities are ultimately in service of the story in that film.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to talk about the context of the films because both these, I mean, essentially these are the same kind of movie. Angry, lonely person is lost in the world and tries to bring order to it with an act of with cathartic violence.
Mm-hmm.
But but the story context in both is ultimately so infused by the time and the context of when these movies are coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So the Taxi Driver, it's Vietnam vet is walking around New York City completely detached from the world, and he cannot connect with anyone no matter how hard he tries. And
his attempts to try are suspect. They are certainly questionable. Their Taxi Driver is a remarkable, shall we say, tutorial on how not to date.
Said charitably, yes.
It's incredibly useful. There's all kinds of don'ts on this. I mean, even if, again, Sybil Shepherd does a great job in this film of looking interested, despite the fact that what's in front of her is not appetizing to most ladies. But even if we go with it, like, okay, she's into him. At least in the first scene, right? She says, "I've never met anyone like you." And she quotes a Chris Christopherson song and says, she describes him as a prophet and a pusher. And okay, so she's into him. So on his second date, where does he take her? To a porn. And she says, "What? You gotta be kidding. This is a dirty movie." And he's like, no, couples do this. Look, we should totally go in here. And then once the movie gets uncomfortable for her, she walks. So that's a nice, realistic portrayal of, how women would react in that situation when they are responsible and show their boundaries. And his inability to cope with her reaction. He's like, "What? I didn't know you felt that way about those movies. Why won't you receive my flowers or my calls anymore?"
Now I'm just imagining how that would play out in a Death Wish film. Probably much better.
Oh, wait! That's how it happens. But what's interesting about Taxi Driver is he then plans on killing the politician that Sybil Shepherd's character works for. That's his plan. He then happens to come across this child prostitute who is incredibly, very, very well portrayed by Jodie Foster in a ridiculously young age. And it's painful and it's awful. And I certainly wasn't in New York in 1976, so I don't know that it's portrayed accurately, but it convinced me that this was what New York in 1976 was like. Gross. And the fact that he fails to kill the politician is what spurs him on this bloody mission where he goes and murders all of the people involved in Iris's sex trade.
Yeah.
And ends up saving her and becoming this massive hero in consequence, which is a remarkable wish fulfillment ending, again, for the lonely man.
Oh,
right? If you just kill the right people, you're a hero.
Well, yes, but it's not fulfilling to him in the end. I think it ultimately, the point is that he's not fulfilled by the end of the story to some degree.
That's interesting.
He walks. He doesn't get he gets to do the violent act of revenge, but he's still the guy that almost killed the politician that his theoretical girlfriend was working for.
Right.
So he failed in the mission he wanted to do. Went out, killed a bunch of people that was technically a more suitable way of seeking out vengeance, and then got fame for it, but it didn't fix him. So
right, yes, but there is this moment where Sybil Shepherd comes back and is sort of wistfully looking at him, saying, "Oh, I read about you in the paper," and he gives her a free cab fare and drives away. I mean, that has to be somewhat satisfying. Or you spurned me once; it's over now.
That's the scene that's like done entirely in the reflection in the mirror, right? Mm-hmm. I think there's a bit of like hollowness implied in that. So it's like it's not satisfying to him. He's getting the movie ending, and but it's not working. I mean, I've heard people say that one of the interesting things about Taxi Driver is that you could technically like play the movie on a loop and the character would still be like in the same, because the movie essentially ends and blends into
He
where
learns very little. He learns very little. We see a lot. We see him go through things, and there are many ways to identify with Travis's pain or the pain of some of the people around him and his inability to cope with that. But yes, he doesn't change a lot.
No.
No. But let's move on to First Reformed.
Sure.
Who is a much older character. I mean, Travis is clearly, 26, 27?
I would say he's like, late 20s, like guy who came back from Vietnam age. So he would be that young guy who was just going out into the big city to kind of get a job. Mm-hmm. Whereas
Reverend Ernst Toller, named after a playwright who was from Prussia and for 6 days or 5 days was the president of the New Revolution, and then that didn't last. So then
How do you know that?
Ernst Toller is a very famous playwright.
I didn't know that, actually.
So after this is who the character's named after, not the character, but the actual Ernst Toller was president of the New Republic of Prussia for 5 or 6 days, got deposed, went to prison for many years, got out of prison because he was such an amazing playwright. His stuff was being done all over Europe. They're like, you know what, we'll let you out. And then he has to escape Nazi Germany, comes to United States, Canada, etc., ends up committing suicide because his siblings died in concentration camps. So Ernst Toller has a very tragic, the historical figure Ernst Toller has this tragic story, and Schrader decides to name his main character Reverend Ernst Toller.
I'm going to pause on that. We need to cut to commercial real quick. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So now we get to go back to our discussion on First Reformed, which she was just discussing a playwright I'd never heard of. So,
But the main character is named Ernst Toller.
Yes.
So he's a much older character. He's in his late 40s or early 50s, and he's already had a full life. Been married, had a child, lost the child to Iraq, the Iraq War. And he was a military chaplain. He convinced his son to go into the military, lost his son very quickly. That ended his marriage. So he was a little washed up. And he's been assigned to this little washed up church that's mostly just a tourist destination. He has a congregation of maybe 6. But it's kind of the best thing he's got going, because his wife has left him and he has no child, and he's already facing despair. And this guy, he's more sympathetic than Travis. What he's dealing with, he's got health problems, he's very sad. We're listening to his narration in a journal. We do listen to Travis's narration as well. We hear their internal monologue through the whole film. But Ernst is a lot harder on himself. Travis is constantly calling New York full of scum when he's clearly a pill-popping drinker who goes to porn. So I'm like, I'm not quite sure how you're different from said scum, Travis. Whereas Toller is truly trying to hold himself up as a man with integrity, trying to do his jobs quickly and, with gratitude and, be kind to everyone who's coming across his path. And he has a drinking problem, which he's very carefully hiding. And why is he drinking? Maybe because, is that causing the health problems? Are they related? We're not sure. But he ends up having this congregant who is in despair because of climate change. And I would say one of the things I like the best about First Reformed is how much time Schrader takes to discuss a tough subject like climate change in a despairing sense. Both characters in that scene where he is trying to pastorally counsel Michael, they put out some interesting arguments, both in the details and the facts of climate change, and also on Toller's response that said, well, we may be in peril that we've never been in before, but the despair you're feeling is universal and timeless. Everyone feels this. You're not alone in your despair. And I thought that was an amazing debate.
Yeah, I was saying with the Taxi Driver thing is that with that one's clearly it's a post-Vietnam revenge film about a character who can't find catharsis and who keeps making mistakes that make his life continue this thing. But with First Reformed, this is a story about a guy who basically has gone out into the world and done what he's conceived as basically the right thing at every step, whose life is just getting, the bottom keeps dropping out at every single opportunity. So everything he goes out and responds with, the worst possible consequence is happening as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. But he's also very much taking responsibility.
Yeah,
he knows. Well, I encouraged my son to go to war, and I lost my son.
Well, yeah,
maybe that wasn't such a good idea.
He's a much more self-reflective character than Travis Bickle. So he does good things, bad things happen, and he's aware that the bad things are happening because of what he's doing. And so as a result, he just keeps falling more and more into despair. He keeps falling more and more into alcoholism.
But also still trying to do the right thing, at least by others.
Yeah.
He's, trying to, his lecture on how the church was part of the Underground Railroad. He's very kind to the children. He goes and visits the youth group and tries to talk to a young lady whose dad is unemployed and say, you know what, prosperity and the gospel really shouldn't go together, which is not a portrayal of Christians we see a lot. Usually the loudest Christians are the prosperity gospel ones, the Osteens, etc. And it's exciting to hear a pastoral character saying, actually, Jesus didn't live that, Jesus didn't preach that. But of course, he's immediately interrupted by another teenager and doesn't get to go very far in that. But I found all of those scenes fascinating, that Schrader takes the time to talk about such issues.
Yeah, I've described this when I've written about it, is essentially it's a film about living in a world where everything around you, including yourself, is just dying. Like, the body is dying, the world is dying, everything around you is
the
just...
The congregation is dying.
Yeah. It's a world that's... It's about how you look into that world and still find some sort of faith in trying to keep moving forward into it, assuming that everything is just going to continue to get worse. And the movie is ultimately about him trying to find or falling into a radical solution to it that is probably the most morally unethical way to approach it.
Right. So we're allowed to give spoilers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you haven't seen First Reformed, skip until the next segment. But this is we'll talk about it briefly. But ultimately his plan is to blow everything up. So
First Reformed takes this massive tank for me after the IMAX dream sequence, which it just got silly after that, and I just stopped believing in it. So Reverend Toller gets on top of this pregnant widow at her request, of course. It's entirely consensual, but completely violates all kinds of pastoral rules, and gets on top of her in this sort of supposed platonic cuddling session, and then behind them goes to this green screen IMAX tour of fancy landscapes, and we watch their figures flying through the earth. And it's this very silly dream sequence. I guess we're supposed to believe that this moment of cuddling is so transcendent.
I appreciate the filmmaking involved in there, because it's the one moment of the film where everything comes alive, really, because the film is shot very statically and very mutedly. The colors are all very, it looks like fall. It looks like just like everything is just dead outside, which is part of the theme.
Yeah, the production design is amazing. Everything is monochrome except for these brief moments of blood or urine or alcohol. Like, there'll be a striking splash of color, and it's rarely a good sign.
Yeah, so I appreciate this moment of transcendence where he finally, everything just kind of crystallizes in him, and he realizes what he needs to do within his own ethos of just taking something sort of action, because at this point he's already discovered that the church is being funded by a green energy corporation that won't let him talk about it, and
green energy,
or not great. Sorry, I misspoke. The fossil fuel company or whatever.
It's like it's an oil.
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah, definitely not the green energy. Yes,
No.
And so what he decides that he needs to now take the suicide vest from the person he tried to stop from committing suicide, but who did it anyway, and take that vest and go blow up a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Is to me the most cowardly, bitter, horrible decision he could possibly make.
But I think that's intentional, though. I think that's the statement, is that it is despairing. Because when I saw it the first time, I just like, is this movie advocating for this, or is this? Because that's the question. Is this an advocating for suicide bombing innocent people, or is it just a depiction of despair at its lowest point?
But then he chooses not to do it because said pregnant widow shows up at the church. He can't kill her. He was fine with killing Lord knows how many of innocent people, but her, not this one.
Yeah.
So then he goes into this is what we would call the prep sequence, where he's like, well, what else can I do? And he wraps himself in barbed wire, and he's clearly agitated, pours himself a glass of liquid plumber. And then she manages to get into the home.
I think it's hallucinating at this point.
Well, yes, that's the question. Are those final moments real or just him imagining? Is he imagining this? And one of the reviews I read with Schrader suggested it was real. And I was a little shocked because, yes, he's wrapped in barbed wire and they're smooching gratuitously. She'd feel the barbed wire. Also, she's over 8 months pregnant at this point, so the fact that they're that close together doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I also thought this is clearly a hallucination. This is him dreaming of some happy ending when he's actually just ingested liquid plumber. Maybe
Yeah.
a reference to Heather's. I don't know.
Well, at this point, I think. I mean, it all builds up to the point where the film just cuts off.
Right.
We don't ultimately see if he does the whole act of cathartic violence. We don't see if he just dies. But I think the implication is just that he dies right there. Like, this is all just a fever dream in his head for the last couple minutes of his life. So.
Yeah, very possibly. Whereas, had they done, I don't know if this is Schrader or the character, had they chosen, suppose the ending was, you know what, I'm going to marry this pregnant widow of the guy who committed suicide, or I'm going to move to Buffalo and be with her and give up my pastoral position. I mean, that would have been problematic, but still a much braver and more interesting choice.
It would have involved the character ultimately resigning from the world, though, and just admitting, like, well, I can't fix anything. I guess I'm just going to go write it out. But which I don't think is what he wanted to say necessarily. But
Well, the question is, given the state of the world, do you stay and fight in whatever capacity you can, or do you give up, and do more damage? Right? That's how far down the line he goes. It's not just that he's going to die. He's got to take out a bunch of innocent people with him.
yeah.
Unlike, say, Travis in Taxi Driver, who, although he intends to kill a politician, ends up only killing bad guys. The gun control messages of certainly Taxi Driver are fascinating. We do have a sequence where there's a good guy with a gun sequence where there's a holdup, and Travis just happens to be there and is able to take out the person at the holdup.
Okay. I wouldn't have considered that, actually, from a 70s film, but...
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what I mean, in those days.
That might be just reading modern into it, but I don't know.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, yes, I am. I'm absolutely reading gun control messages, or lack thereof, pro-gun, anti-gun, into it in a retroactive sense. Yes. So in the end, First Reformed plunges into this very silly and unearned, bitter place that I couldn't go with. But the first hour and 15 was so meticulous and interesting and slow and sincere that I absolutely thought it was worth watching.
I'll take the opposite side of that, just because I think that it's just part of Schrader's continual exploration of despair. I think you have to see that ultimate descent in order to understand Toller's full descent. We had to cut off at this point, but join us for the final segment. We'll be getting the movie recommendation for this week. Stay tuned. Hello, welcome back. Now we're here for the movie recommendation for this week.
I would recommend Labyrinth, a Jim Henson film around 1987, starring David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly and many fantastic Muppet performers, choreographed by Gates McFadden, also known as Dr. Crusher from Star Trek Next Generation. Some of the most incredible puppetry, production design, acting, it ain't bad. But some of the most amazing puppeteering, and what an incredible fantasy adventure story. And music by David Bowie. Highly recommended.
I mean, I've seen it, so obviously I can attest to that. I mean, the acting it's on par with a kids movie, so it's fine.
Yeah, for its intended audience, it did great. And Brian Henson, who is Jim's son, plays Hoggle the troll. Jennifer Connelly, I don't know if it's her debut, but she's certainly young. She's maybe 14 years old, but she does a great job. And for a female-centered, strong lead character, she is fantastic. And what the movie does for her story and her psyche, what she's going through, what she needs to learn, It's fantastic stuff.
Yeah, I love all the old Jim Henson stuff. Although it's always strange to me watching anything that's not Muppets, because every time they do movies that weren't Muppets, they kind of decidedly go the opposite from like a production design standpoint.
It's very dark.
Yeah.
Very dark. But not in a gritty sense, but in a dark fantasy sense.
Yeah.
That, like, not everything has to be Disney-fied and shiny. Like,
No.
there's this wonderful fantasy world of swamps and various lizard creatures and different goblins, and it's absolutely wonderful.
It comes from that wonderful school of 80s fantasy where you scare the crap out of your children.
Yes! Probably my first viewing of this film, I was cowering, but couldn't leave because I cared so much about Sarah and wanted her to triumph in this fantasy realm and solve the labyrinth. And also, this was before there was CGI, so everything is done with models and actual puppets, and everything that happened was created by carpenters and amazing makeup designers, prosthetics, etc. So enjoy.
Cool. And she works as an actress in Chicago. Did you want to plug any of your films, or?
Oh gosh, right now you can catch me as a guest star on Geek Lounge, which is on Amazon Prime. I'm in one episode of that. You can also catch some of Tyler's work as well as mine on a web series called Why Don't You Like Me, which is on Funny or Die. You can also catch me every month in Starlight Radio Dreams, which is a podcasting show with a comedy habit. Other way around. Comedy show with a podcasting habit that we do every month live in Chicago at Mrs. Murphy and Sons Irish Bistro.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on. That's all the time
Glad to be here.
That's all the time we have for the show. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Antisocial Critic. That's critic without the C at the end. You can find past recordings of the show at the Groupthink Productions YouTube page. And you can find my written reviews at Geeks Under Grace and Legal Insurrection. I'm Tyler with the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a wonderful day.